Hello, today we are going to talk about understanding COVID-19 testing. We are in the middle of a pandemic, so this information is very relevant to our current discussion. So before we go into actual testing, let's have a little background information on what COVID-19 actually is. So the origins of the virus is understood to be from Wuhan City in the Hubei province in central China. Wuhan City is the capital of the Hubei province. It is suspected to be from the wet markets that occur in Wuhan City. Transmission is understood to be from the animals in the marketplace to the humans who are handling the animals. And as far as it arriving in the US, it is understood to come from a European source to New York and Washington. So why is it called COVID-19? So COVID is actually from the coronavirus family of viruses. The D stands for the disease, and the 19 comes from the year 2019 when it was discovered. So what makes it different from the other viruses in the coronavirus family is that there is a new protein on the viral coat that we've never seen before. So we just made up the name coronavirus or COVID-19. This particular protein latches onto a type of receptor in the body called ACE2 receptors, and it is expressed on certain tissues in the body, and we will discuss that later on in the PowerPoint. Once again, the actual coronavirus family is called Coronaviridae. It is previously known to be the second leading cause of the common cold. The most common cause of viruses is from the adenoviruses. All right, so let's talk a little bit about transmission. So coronavirus actually exists in all types of animals. We're talking about cats, dogs, rabbits, mice, turkeys, whales, and even in bats. So specifically with COVID-19, it is understood that the virus was actually living in a bat, and then it infected a pangolin, which was the vector. And a pangolin, I'll show you a picture of that, is actually in Africa and in Asia. And then the pangolin was used in these wet markets for its meat. So that's where we have the pangolin-human contact, and human beings also have domesticated animals within the marketplace and at home, and domesticated animals can also be infected. Hence why we heard of a cat in Belgium being infected with the coronavirus and passing away. And then we also heard of a tiger at the Bronx Zoo this year being infected with the coronavirus. So actually, when we have the coronavirus infection, optimal conditions mean all of these components coming together and passing on the virus. So here's a picture of the pangolin. I've never heard of it until the pandemic here. So it's actually a scaly skinned mammal. Like I said before, it is found in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. It's not a reptile, it looks pretty cool there. All right, so let's talk about previous epidemics. First one is SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. The years of that occurring is 2002 and 2003. This was first identified in China, Guangdong, China, which is the Southeast China region. Then we have the swine flu. It was also called H1N1 back in 2009. It was first identified in Mexico. It was actually declared a pandemic in 2009 by the WHO. Next one is MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, identified in 2012. It actually infected many of the countries in the Middle East, and it was spread to South Korea, who visited the Arabian Peninsula back in 2015. Then we have the Ebola virus, which is the previous epidemic before COVID-19. It started out in 2014. We seem to have a good handle on that. 2015 and eventually 2016, it was eradicated, or we understood for it to be eradicated. And the outbreak started in the DRC, or Democratic Republic of Congo. So here is a picture of COVID-19. As you can see, there are proteins on the surfaces, and there is an actual protein that we do not know or recognize, and that is the cause of a lot of research and understanding what it does in the body. So, like I said before, the surface protein binds to ACE2 receptors that we find in the lungs, the kidneys, and in the gastrointestinal system as well, which is why it makes sense that some of the symptoms that we associate with COVID can be seen in the respiratory system. Cough, shortness of breath, fever. We also have chills and myalgia. So the symptoms with the asterisk are the three main symptoms that we concentrated on as far as identifying those who are possibly infected with COVID-19. Other symptoms include diarrhea, vomiting, conjunctivitis, which is basically irritation, redness of the eyes, and clotting. We did see post-mortem that some people who passed away from the COVID-19 had microinfarcts, a lot of clotting in the body. So this is still something in progress. We're still learning how COVID-19 affects the body symptoms system. Sorry. All right, so I mentioned a lot of viruses along with COVID-19. Some of them are not from the coronavirus family, such as Ebola and also the swine flu. But what is it about these viruses that make them different? And there's two factors: mortality and transmissibility. How easy is it to pass from person to person? And how fatal are these viruses once you catch them? I'm going to go through just a couple examples before we move on. For example, SARS, the one that was in Asia, also infected quite a few people in Canada. It has a low transmissibility rate. That means from human to human, it's pretty hard to pass. And when SARS had the outbreak, we saw that there was a high prevalence in those with comorbidities and a lot of people who are over the age of 65. Hence why it didn't really catch on to the US. The next one would be MERS. An example of MERS, the one that caused a lot of death in the Middle East. It pretty much was transmitted from the dromedary camel to the human being. And it was infection through eating uncooked meat and even the urine of the camel. So once the human being was infected through the uncooked meat or the urine from the camel, it was a little difficult to pass from human to human. And then we have the severe picture that we saw with Ebola. It was very easy to transmit because you could find it in breast milk, semen, blood, even in respiratory droplets. But it was also very fatal. Once the person was infected, fatality rates were very high. So if the fatality rate is high, it's very difficult for someone who's infected to move around and pass it on to other people outside of the region, which is why it pretty much was contained in that sub-Saharan eastern block of Africa. All right, so back to COVID. What are the elements of the virus that we can look for or that we do understand right now? It can survive in the nares, in those for about 21 days, and virus activity reaches threshold in 2 to 14 days before symptom onset. So that basically means the virus is in the body, doing its thing, replicating, and not until we can test it for presence is going to take about 2 or maybe 14 days, or the person starts to feel sick. So that means the virus has a chance to replicate and be active in the body for a while before we see signs of it. So presence of the virus is going to be in the back of the throat, what we call the nasopharyngeal aspect, in the nose, back deep in the nose, or the lungs. And the last aspect of COVID-19 is that viral shedding can happen 6 weeks after symptom onset. So we have seen with some of the COVID cases in the US that even though people will recover because they have 2 negative tests, they will report that it'll take them 4, 5, or even 6 weeks for them to start to feel normal again, for them to start feeling like they can go up a flight of stairs. And we understand that because the virus is still active, but it's not at the level where it is causing sickness. All right, so droplet transmission, as we understand, can be on doorknobs, countertops. We are learning or have learned that yelling and screaming in a closed space can also facilitate an infection and transmission, sneezing. And it's also not very clear how long the virus lives on some certain surfaces. We did have reports of it living on plastic and steel for 2 to 3 days, but those reports are still being subject to scrutiny because we don't understand all the conditions that the virus is active. All right, now let's get into testing methods. All right, so testing, basically a blood test done in the crook of your arm. It could be done in a lab or in a doctor's office. If it's done in the lab, basically your doctor can give you a prescription to get that done. All right, so the proteins that are tested through blood is IgM and IgG. I will explain that in the next slide. Also, a little finger prick. This could be done at the lab, the doctor's office, or the pharmacy. In the case, for example, in New York, because there was such a high infection rate, the governor did team up with labs and pharmacies to be able to have people go up and test their levels or their blood. And then also nasal or throat swab. This can be done at home or in a doctor's office. This is basically looking at IgM. The tests that are done at home does not need to have a doctor's prescription. So that's good for convenience. All right, so let's talk about the IgM, IgG that we were talking about. IgM, this is the protein that's detected in the body from the immune system with an active infection. So it's going to be 2 days before symptom onset, up to 3 weeks is where the IgM will be positive on your test. IgG is basically for people who are getting over the sickness, that viral activity has declined, and we see the presence of this protein because your immune system has created copies and is now going to put it in its memory bank just in case it needs to recognize COVID-19 again and do something about it. So be mindful that some people do not show any symptoms, but were infected. They can also test positive for the IgG protein, meaning that they were infected before, but now their immune system has developed these proteins to dock in their memory bank for any future infections. All right. So we've also heard a lot about the FDA during the COVID-19 process, and there's basically 2 designations for tests, and you do have to understand the difference just so that you have a peace of mind about the test that you are taking. The 2 designations are FDA approved and FDA EUA approved. So FDA approved, it's a short definition, but there's a little bit more to it. So basically, FDA approved means the benefits of the products outweigh the known risk of intended use. But it's a little bit more complicated than that because in order for a laboratory to say that their product or their testing method is FDA approved, that means it has gone under the rigorous classifications and testing methods put forth by the FDA in order for them to be able to say they've met all those standards. Okay, and then we have FDA EUA approved. EUA is basically emergency use authorization. This is pretty much going to occur during a time where testing has to meet the needs of infection rate. And so because COVID-19 had such a high infection rate, the labs did not have the capacity to meet the demands of the numerous amount of testing. So it does have maybe like a truncated list of standards that a lab can meet in order to meet the need of the number of tests. All right, so once you are tested, what does that mean? What do we do with it? So even if you test positive for IgG, that doesn't mean you're all good, you're safe, you're free to go. And the World Health Organization did clarify that because like I said before, we're still learning about the virus. We're still learning what it does, how long it stays in the body, how sensitive are these tests. So we know that you've had a past infection, which does allow a little bit peace of mind, but it doesn't spell out everything for you. So you still have to take precautions. Right now, uh, we've talked about social distancing, wearing a mask, hand washing. That conversation is still alive. So you do need to abide by that because there are people who have not been affected, and we don't know how they're going to be affected by the infection. So we're still a work in progress. All right, so contact information. We are Revolutions Naturopathic. Our phone number is 916-351-9355. You can find us at our website, revolutionsdocs.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and I am Dr. Magda Parnell. Have a good day.